Greetings, my name is Lisa Jackson. I'm the Education Coordinator here at the Savannah African Art Museum. Welcome. Welcome to our February workshop. So, yes, we are safe distancing and we are wearing our masks. But since our camera person is way across the other side of the room, I can remove this so I can communicate to you better. Thank you. And thank you for joining us for our February workshop. Our February workshop is honoring the ancestors. Yes, footprints of our ancestors are evidenced in so many ways in our lives and in so many cultures around the world and celebrated in different ways, different festivals, different celebrations. Individuals celebrate them. So what we thought we would do for this workshop is that we're going to show you how some cultures celebrate the ancestors around the world. So we're going to look at two major celebrations. One is in Mexico, another one is in Japan. And then what we're going to do is we're going to show you a couple of pieces here at the museum to show you how some of these pieces are used to celebrate the Africans in West Africa and Central Africa. So now, some of you that are watching may have noticed that I'm not greeting you from the usual workshop room where I have my workshops. Well, no, I am greeting you from a gallery at the main museum and an exhibit that just launched that we are very excited about and hoping that you will come and visit. And it is our hair exhibit. Yes, the hair exhibit. It's Roots, Hair, Culture, and History. And it's exploring and celebrating the hair of Africans, mainly from the West African and Central Africa, because those are the two areas of Africa that we have our collection from. So that is what I am doing today. I'm standing here in this room with all these different pieces in our hair exhibit, and we're inviting you to come down and to come take a look. Okay, it's Lisa Jackson, Education Coordinator at the Savannah African Art Museum. I'm back with part 2 of our Honoring the Ancestors workshop. And as I said before, as part of the workshop, I have invited journalist, author, and photographer Lauri Lyons here to speak with us about an initiative that she has brought to my attention. It's Rest with Honor Savannah Initiative. So she will be here discussing that with us. And just to give you a little bit of an intro about it, just about August, she contacted the museum and brought to our attention that there are two Savannah squares, Calhoun Square and Whitfield Square, that at that location, it was originally an African burial ground. And it was the only place where Africans and then later Negroes could be buried in Savannah. And when they decided to make them the squares for Calhoun and Whitfield, they removed the headstones, but they did not remove any of the bodies. And the two squares are at Abercorn and Havisham, and both between Taylor and Gordon, East Taylor and East Gordon. So when she brought this to my attention, I recall passing these squares several times, actually sitting in them. One of them is the one with the gazebo, and I've sat there several times reading, and I've never seen a mark or any information about the burial ground. So she brought this to my attention. Of course, it sparked interest, because as a museum that's honoring and sharing information about African culture, history, and spirituality through art, obviously this is something that we needed to look into. So I asked Lauri for documentation, and she was doing the research and connected with the city, and she confirmed this information for me. So at that point, I went to our executive director and sat down with her and shared all of the information, all the research that Lauri had done. And we agreed that we would support this initiative. And when you say support, how are we supporting it? There is a petition that we have signed, and we are asking others to sign to properly honor these ancestors who are buried there as we honor our own ancestors. We all honor, all different cultures honor their ancestors in some type of way. So we are asking that these ancestors who are buried there without any recognition, acknowledgement, that they are properly honored and recognized. And then the second point is that the two individuals, Calhoun and Whitfield, who the squares are named after, we also learned that both of them were very strong advocates of slavery. And with that said, just let that rest for a moment, that these Africans are buried in a place where two individuals who were strong advocates for the enslavement of these ancestors. Just think about that for a moment. So, we have brought Lauri on to give us more information about this, and we're very pleased to have her here. So, Lauri, please share more information about this and how you came about to know about this, as you do not live here in Savannah. So how you came upon this information, and where you are with this initiative, and how other people can get involved with it.
Well, first of all, thank you, Lisa, and the Savannah African Art Museum for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. I first came to Savannah in 2017 on a press trip to report about the film industry. And while I was in town, I took a walking tour by the Blue Orb Company. It was a ghost walking tour to see the city, learn some history, and get some information about Savannah. And one of the stops on the tour was Calhoun Square. And while we were in Calhoun Square, the tour guide briefly and casually mentioned that he believed that Calhoun Square had once upon a time been an African burial ground. They did not elaborate on any information of why they thought that and how they came to come to that conclusion. But I thought it was a very interesting piece of information. And while I was standing in the square, I had a very visceral feeling while standing there that something just was not right in that area. And when I left Savannah and came home, I had this nagging feeling like this is something that I should follow up on and to learn more about the history, to find out, first of all, if that comment was fact or fiction. So I decided to do some research, and I started to make a few calls to people who had written about Savannah's history. And then I also contacted the Municipal Archives Department and started requesting information and getting background paperwork, documents, etc., reading through that information, and then starting to question what was there, because you see some information that raises more questions that you need answers to.
Right.
So once I started doing that, and I also got some references for some digital archives to check into as well for additional historical information. I was in contact with people who were biographers of Whitfield and scholars and historians to get information from them as well. And once I did that and looked at everything, I realized that this ghost story, rumor, folklore was indeed fact. The city of Savannah wrote a document to create a Negro burial ground that was separate from what was considered the proper Savannah city. And the reason why they did that was because in the history of Savannah, for a while, people were just being buried all over the place. And the city decided we have to get more organized and create proper cemeteries that are maintained by the city. So when they did that, they started to create cemeteries, but those cemeteries were always segregated. So you had cemeteries for Catholics, you had cemeteries for Christians, you had cemeteries for Jewish people. These were all separate. And for the African people, they made a law that it would be illegal for Africans to be buried within the city and in the city cemeteries. So they would be given a piece of land way out in the middle of nowhere at that time where they can create a Negro burial ground specifically for Black people. So that was written up as a document in 1763 to designate that area, which now we know as Calhoun Square, Whitfield Square area. So the burial ground was placed there. However, the city did not use its funds to properly maintain it. It was kind of like, okay, that's out there. We're not going out there. That's your business. So there was never a wall, a gate, or a fence to properly enclose it. So that was the only place Black people were legally allowed to be buried. If they buried Black people anywhere else in Savannah, they would be fined for doing so or punished for doing so. So with that, burials were happening for almost 100 years in that space. And then the city needed to expand its territory. So they needed that area to build these new squares because the city was growing. So what they did was they closed the burial ground, and then they did not remove the bodies from the burial ground. What they did was basically clear the top and then redesign that area as two separate squares, which was first Calhoun Square was built first, and then pretty much immediately followed by Whitfield Square that was built.
And it's my understanding those are the last two squares that were developed.
Exactly. So when that happened, the city made the claim that they moved the bodies and relocated them to what was going to be Laurel Grove South, which was an area specific for new Negro burial grounds. But that's not what happened. In September of 2020, the Municipal Archives Department wrote a signed research statement on letterhead confirming that the city only had records of two individual bodies being removed from the burial ground. And one was a woman named Emily, and another one was a woman named Rena, and those were both Black people. But other than that, they do not have official records of any mass removals of bodies from that burial ground into Laurel Grove South. And that was an astonishing piece of research to have because, as far as I know, they had never written a research statement to confirm that. So that is a very big deal that they are recognizing this is what actually happened and that the burial ground itself is real. And something else I should note that in that document from 1763 that designates the burial ground, it is written that that area is to forever be known as the Negro burial ground.
And it says that in the document?
It says it in the document.
Interesting. So at this point, there is no question that this was the burial ground. And for people that live here, when you say that this was way out in the Savannah area, that area right now is part of the historic area. So you just need to think about during this time, this was Savannah not fully developed. So that was the outskirts at the time. It may not seem like it now. Of course, it's not the outskirts, but this was when Savannah was still being developed, and that was considered outskirts. So people just need to understand that. Very interesting, and thank you so much for sharing all the research that you have shared with us. So now I just would like a little bit more information about the two individuals who the squares are actually named after. And we keep saying Whitfield and Calhoun, so we just need to make it very clear. It's Reverend George Whitfield and Jane C. Calhoun. So tell us a little bit about each of them.
Okay, so Reverend George Whitfield was an Englishman born and raised in England, and he became an Anglican preacher, and he was extremely popular. And he left England, traveled to the United States. Well, at the time, it was actually the colonies. And he traveled to the colonies, and he was traveling throughout the 13 colonies preaching his gospel. He was a founder of Methodism, and he became extremely popular because at the time, the most popular form of media was pamphlets, printed pamphlets. So his sermons were printed as pamphlets and distributed throughout the colonies, and his publisher was Benjamin Franklin. Yeah, very interesting. So Whitfield is considered basically the first celebrity in the colonies and what would be known later as the United States. He was that popular. And with that, at some point he traveled to South Carolina and he bought a plantation. And with that, he also bought slaves. So he had a working plantation. He owned enslaved people in South Carolina. And he wanted to expand his business, as did other South Carolina plantation owners. They wanted to expand from South Carolina into Georgia. But there was a big problem. In 1732, when the colony of Georgia was formed, it was formed and mandated to be a no slavery colony, which I had never heard of before. I was surprised. It was the only colony in the 13 colonies to be a no slavery colony. And part of the reason for that was the Georgia trustees who were maintaining the colony decided that, number one, they did not want to be outnumbered by Black people, which is what happened in South Carolina. And they also wrote that they wanted the people of Georgia to have a strong work ethic, meaning they wanted them to do the manual labor required to build the state themselves and not depend on slave labor, which is very interesting. So with that mandate, it was difficult for plantation owners to move their business into Georgia because it was illegal. So what Whitfield did was, because of his immense popularity and his immense wealth, he became the primary lobbyist who lobbied the Georgia trustees to overturn its ban on slavery. And he did that from 1748 to 1750. He made speeches, he wrote letters, etc. He was really hounding them to overturn this ban because he believed that the financial prosperity of Georgia depended on slave labor. And he also wanted, for his own personal use, to be able to create a charity, which would be called the Bethesda Orphanage. So finally, in 1751, the Georgia trustees overturned the ban on slavery, and slavery became legalized in the state of Georgia. And with that, Whitfield really moved into Georgia. He set up his orphanage. And it's important for people to know, because this is usually cut out of the biographies and narratives of Whitfield, is that in the orphanage, the people who worked at the orphanage and who were the actual Black children at the orphanage were enslaved and owned by Whitfield. They were his legal property. And they had to work at the orphanage to maintain its running of the farm and the maintenance, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm certain that will come to a surprise to many folks here in Savannah, because we all know about Bethesda, but we don't know that piece of the narrative. So interesting.
And it's very ironic as well, because the word Bethesda, the meaning is mercy. But the people at the orphanage were enslaved and had to work. They had no free will. And when Whitfield died in 1770, he did not emancipate the people that he owned. He actually bequeathed them 50 slaves to the Countess Huntington. And from what we know now, there really are no records of the Countess emancipating those people either.
Hmm. Now it's interesting. So Calhoun, okay, he was from England, and then he lived in South Carolina, and so but he was not really from Georgia. He did not live here, and he brought his business, his orphanage, and his movement to Georgia.
Right, Whitfield. Whitfield was from
Yes, I'm
England.
sorry, Whitfield.
Yes,
I'm sorry, Whitfield.
yes. He was not a person who was born and raised in the colonies, and definitely not Georgia at all. He was a person from England who had come over and set up his business in South Carolina and then later into Georgia.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Now share a little bit about James C. Calhoun.
So John C. Calhoun was a South John C. Calhoun was a South Carolina native. His family owned slaves, which was common at the time. He was a South Carolina politician who served as Secretary of War, Secretary of State. He was the Senator of South Carolina, and he was also Vice President of the United States twice. So he had major political positions and stature. He was a fiercely pro-slavery politician. And Calhoun was also the leading voice supporting terrorism and oppression against Black and Indigenous people as well in America. And the Senate considers Calhoun to be one of the most prolific writers and speakers in the Senate's history. So he is considered to be the philosophical architect of the Civil War, because he was constantly speaking about principles that later became the reason for the Civil War. Some of those things that he brought into being he was the creator of the theory of nullification. He was the creator of the theory and philosophy of states' rights to enslave people in particular. And he also was the person who thought up the idea for secession from the Union. Calhoun was also responsible for creating and enforcing the Indian Removal Act, and that is better known as the Trail of Tears, where 60,000 Native Americans were forcibly marched off of their land so that the government could create cotton plantations specifically. And once they were able to acquire that land illegally, then they needed, of course, more enslaved people to work that land.
Right.
And Calhoun had a long record of voting against states coming into the Union that would be free states. He wanted any new territories in America to be slave states. That was a big deal for him. So he has a long record of what we consider today domestic terrorism, definitely oppression, and genocide as well, because the Trail of Tears is considered one of the largest acts of genocide in America. And it's important to note that with Calhoun, because he came up with the idea of Southern states seceding from the Union, that remember the reason why the Civil War physically started was because the first shots were made from South Carolina. And that was his home state. It is important to note that with John C. Calhoun, that many of his monuments around the country are currently being removed. They have been removed from major institutions, including Yale University, Calhoun's alma mater, Clemson University in South Carolina, Lake Calhoun in Minnesota, and Marion Square in South Carolina. And in Marion Square, South Carolina, it's important to note that in 2015, a white supremacist named Dylan Roof entered the Mother Emanuel Church, and he killed 9 parishioners engaged in Bible study inside the church. And why that is significant is because the Mother Emanuel Church is located on Calhoun Street, named after John C. Calhoun, and it is around the corner from Marion Square, which had a massive physical monument statue of John C. Calhoun. So that statue was removed, but I'm starting to notice a pattern of places where they are named after John Calhoun, where physical acts of violence are taking place by people who are white supremacists or right wing extremists. The latest thing that happened was in January 6, 2021, during the Capitol building riot. There was a man who entered the Capitol building, with a huge Confederate flag unfurled, and he was photographed standing in front of a portrait of John C. Calhoun. So, as I said earlier, Calhoun is a Confederate icon, and people should be aware that there is a pattern that is starting to show itself of these places that are named in honor of him becoming a magnet for extremist behavior. So that's another reason to rename Calhoun Square.
Okay. Well, that's a mouthful of history.
It is. He was busy.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So now, with that information, because what we're trying to do here is share the information. Savannah African Art Museum, we are supporting this initiative, and I'll let you first tell how others can support the initiative, and I will let you know that we have set up a petition station here at the museum for those to sign the petition. It's a petition that's designed specifically for this by the city. So it is not our petition. It's a petition that was designed by the city, and for us to submit to them, to the city, to have the burial grounds acknowledged with a marker, and to have name change. Because when we hear this history, and to know that these ancestors are buried with a marker and acknowledgement and honoring of these two individuals that not only supported slavery, but supported it very heavily. And their backgrounds show that. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about how others can support the initiative, and again, tell us what the name of the initiative is and how others can support it.
So in July 2020, I started an initiative called Rest with Honor Savannah. And at first, I started an online petition on change.org, and that was to ask people to support as you said, the recognition of the burial ground itself as an African burial ground, to also have the names of the squares changed. I am suggesting that the names of the squares be changed to Jubilee Square and Emancipation Square, and down the line to build a memorial for the African burial ground as well. And the way that people can participate now, especially local people in Savannah, this is very important, is that the city manager's office requires that 51% of property owners who own property adjacent to the squares agree to the name change. And they have provided a petition form for people to sign, but the city manager's office is requiring that people do hand signatures on the forms. So you can go to the website for this initiative, which is restwithhonorproject.org. You can download the petition if you like. You can sign it and email it back to me on the website. Or if you would rather do a signature in person, you can go to the Savannah African Art Museum, where they have set up a petition station where it is a safe and secure location for people to come in, sign their names, print their names, their address, and then check off that they agree to the renaming of the squares. Once I collect all of these signatures, then I will be submitting them to the city office, the city manager's office, for them to verify the data and then to make a decision about renaming of the squares.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And the the initiative is evolving regularly. Other supporters, other information that Lauri Lyons acquires is being posted on the website. So give that website again, give that information again, because you may want to just keep up with it and check in on it to see what other information is available. And if you have any questions, there is there a telephone number where they can reach you, or they can email you if they have any questions?
Yes, if you go to the website address is www.restwithhonorproject.org. You'll see all the information there. You'll have the petition information, the history of the initiative, the history of the African burial ground in Savannah as well. You'll have a space to contact me directly where I will respond to you with any questions or inquiries that you may have. And you'll also have updates about how the initiative is evolving with any new research or any new achievements that we're able to accomplish as well. And I really encourage anyone who is in Savannah to sign the petition, to go to the website, to learn the history of it, and to spread the word about it. It's very important for people in Savannah to realize that the African burial ground that is located beneath Calhoun, Whitfield Square, and the space in between is incredibly historic and significant to American history. This is a space where the people who are buried in it are the people who created the work for the cotton plantations and the rice plantations, which were the original economy of the United States. These are the people who made America rich, literally rich. And they made America rich financially, rich, as well as culturally rich. And it's very important for people to recognize that. And also, if you live in Savannah or you just enjoy the city of Savannah, Savannah is known for being one of the most historically beautiful places in America. The architecture, the landscaping, etc. And all of that was done by the enslaved labor of the people who are buried in that burial ground. So it is a very significant space. It is a sacred space that is a critical part of the American narrative of the history of this country. So it's located in Savannah, but I have to stress that it is American history that is located there. So I hope that local people really learn more of the history of it, the facts about it, not the ghost stories and the folklore and the rumors, and that you really take the opportunity to acknowledge that space and acknowledge the people who are buried there, because it is significantly important to the story of American history, past and present. And to remember as well that the burial ground was a burial ground and currently is a burial ground, because the bodies are still located there. And to let you know that in 2004, utility workers went to Calhoun Square, the Maskey Center, and they were doing some work. They dug down 4 feet and encountered human remains. Those human remains had forensic testing done on them, and that they meet the timeline of the burial ground. And I had a forensic anthropologist review the Georgia Bureau of Investigation forensic report, and he concluded that, in his opinion, it is more than likely a skull that is of African descent.
Well, Lauri, I thank you so much for coming here and sharing this information, and with all your documentation. We are, honored to join with you in this initiative, and we're asking our viewers and those that visit our museum to please check it out. Check it out for yourself. The documentation is there. Check it out for yourself, and please consider supporting this initiative. This is part of Black history. This is part of world history. So please consider it. And thank you so much, Lauri. And we will be keeping you abreast of any new developments. And in the meantime, enjoy your day. Enjoy February Black History Month. This is a time when there's so much information to learn, and sometimes this information makes us feel uncomfortable. However, that discomfort helps us move things and get to a point of feeling better about what we can do in changing some of the things, righting some of the wrongs. Maybe we can't right the wrong that happened, but we can kind of do something about it going forward. So I invite you, please check it out, see for yourself, read the information. If you have inquiries, contact Lauri. Visit us here at the museum. And thank you for joining us.